Tonight, there's new reporting about more Trump program cuts at the Department of Defense. It comes after nearly 400 books were purged from the U.S. Naval Academy Library following an order from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, including Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and a book about Holocaust survivors. Also note, Hitler's Mein Kampf was not one of the books removed. Best-selling author Ryan Holiday, best known for his work on Stoic philosophy, shared in a New York Times op-ed what happened last Monday when he was scheduled to lecture at the U.S. Naval Academy. Quote, "For the past 4 years, I've been delivering a series of lectures on the virtues of Stoicism to midshipmen at the U.S. Naval Academy. I was supposed to continue on April 14th to the entire sophomore class on the theme of wisdom. Roughly an hour before my talk was to begin, I received a call. Would I refrain from any mention in my remarks about the recent removal of 381 supposedly controversial books from the Nimitz Library on campus? When I declined, my lecture was canceled." A Navy spokesperson told the Times that the Academy, quote, "made a schedule change that aligns with its mission of preparing midshipmen for careers of service." Joining us now is Ryan Holiday, author of the new book, Right Thing, Right Now, Good Values, Good Character, Good Deeds. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us this evening on The Last Word. I just want to start with this. I know what it's like to have a speaking engagement. You get prepared, you have your speech, you're excited to do it, you're going around, you're talking. Sometimes there's compensation involved, et cetera, et cetera. What made you decide to say, hey, look, if you guys aren't going to let me tell the truth to our military, I'd rather not do it? What was that decision-making like for you?
I just felt that in good conscience, I couldn't have lectured there as I did in 2022 about courage, in 2024 about justice, and then fold because someone was trying to suppress criticism of a decision that I suspect every professor and administrator at the Naval Academy knows is antithetical to basic academic independence and this sort of pursuit of wisdom. You don't ban books that you don't like. You don't have to read them, but you don't ban them. And an elite institution has to be willing and able to engage with ideas they disagree with, they don't like, even that are incorrect. And so I felt I couldn't tell them to do it and then model the exact opposite of that behavior.
I want to read for the audience a little bit of the speech you were going to give at the Naval Academy. This is the line that I love. This is as the kids would say, bars. I'm a college professor myself. Read dangerously, read curiously, plunge into unfamiliar territory, get behind enemy lines, and seek to understand anything and everything, particularly the points of view of the people you disagree with. Steelmen rather than strawmen, investigate rather than persecute. Why is that belief system so important, not just for Americans and people in general, but in particular for men and women in the military?
Yeah, look, so this goes all the way back to Sun Tzu, the idea that you have to know your enemy. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, talked about how we have to read behind enemy lines. And what I've always loved about Seneca's writings, I think it's a model for all of us, is the philosopher he quotes the most is Epicurus, ostensibly his greatest rival. And he has this great line. He says, "I'll quote a bad author if the line is good." There's great stuff from people that we disagree with. There are ideas in their work that helps us understand why we have our own beliefs. And so if you're afraid of what you disagree with, you're going to get in trouble. And in fact, a metaphor I heard that I think a lot about is like, what's your style of learning? Are you a soldier or are you a scout? Now, you might think that midshipmen at the Naval Academy want to be soldiers, but soldiers defend beliefs. Scouts go and explore. And we want this generation of leaders who in the future are going to command submarines, who are going to command fighter jets. A graduate of the Naval Academy who's spoken out about this, Admiral Stavridis, was the supreme allied commander of NATO. These are people who are going to deal with factions, with immense moral obligations and responsibilities, and they need to be able to be not just informed historically, but find common ground and be able to get in the mind and the shoes of people and cultures very different than theirs.
Yeah, we have always admired the sort of warrior philosopher, and that requires someone who actually understands things other than the orders and maybe even the morality behind the orders. Ryan, I also want to ask this because I think this is key. Whenever something like this happens, right, there's public backlash, there's commentary, but have you heard from people at the academy? Have you had professors reach out to you, students reach out to you and say, I really wish that you could have given your speech. We're going to find some way around it. Or has everyone sort of circled the wagons around the academy's decision to block what you had to say?
Oh, of course. Privately, I've heard from all sorts of people, and the Naval Academy is one of our absolute crown jewels of this country. It's responsible for our naval power. It's filled with some of the brightest young men and women. In fact, I go all over the world. I talk to all different groups. One of the things that gives me the most hope about our country and about the future is the young men and women that I've got to meet there at the Naval Academy. And I think it says something about where we are now, that they are afraid to speak out, that they are having to follow orders that they know are wrong. Right. And look, I agree that the Naval Academy should be largely apolitical. And that's why it's so unfortunate that the Defense Department and the president plunged it into this political fray, put these people in this impossible situation where they're having to choose between their pensions and their job security and two measly slides in my presentation. They shouldn't have to do that.
You know, it's hard to say that it's an apolitical institution when you get rid of, I know why the Cageberg sings, but you keep Mein Kampf. Ryan Holiday, thank you so much for joining us tonight on The Last Word.